Please welcome your AOTA Inspire 2026 Conference Weaver, Sarah Michelle.
Yes! So crazy right now.
Hello.
Incredibly.
Yes. I love that. Put that back up. Raise high. What is that? That's awesome. Look at that. GW in the house. Yes. Welcome, everyone, to our Slagle lecture. Those of you in the back, where those back screens are not on, so please come forward. Trudy really wants to see your faces. Nothing is more supportive when you're up on this very, very bright stage than to look out and see smiles and see familiar faces. So please come forward for her, because those back screens are not going to be on. All right, welcome, everyone, to our Slagle lecture featuring this year's awardee, Dr. Trudy Mallinson. Yes. Before we bring out Dr. Mallinson, I would like to recognize all the past Slagle lecture awardees we have with us today. I'm going to say their name, have them stand up and wave. Would you first give it up for our last year winner, 2025, Dr. Roseanne Schaff. Our 2024 awardee, Dr. Anita Bundy. Our 2023 awardee, Dr. Mary Lawler. Our 2022 awardee, Dr. Christy Patton. Our 2017 awardee, Dr. Roger Giles. Where's Roger? There we go. All right, 2017, Dr. Roger Smith. There we go, there we go. A little confusion, you know, it's a lot. There's a lot of women here. It's hard to keep track of the men. All right. 2012, here we go for a twirl, Dr. Karen Jacobs. 2003, Dr. Charlotte Royeen. Charlotte? Is she here? No? Oh, here she is, walking up. There we go. Keep the applause going. Here she comes. Oh, all right, sorry, all right. 2001, Dr. Winifred Dunn. There she is. Our 1986 winner, Dr. Catherine Reed. There she is. And finally, 1980, Dr. Carolyn Baum. Oh. Okay, there we go. Your foot got caught. Okay, there we go. Nice wave. All right, did we get everybody? Yes? Okay. And a few extras. That's okay. So thank you for being here today to help us honor our 2026 Slagle Lecture. And to learn more about her, would you please welcome to the stage Roger Ideashi.
I have the honor to introduce my fellow George Washington University revolutionary colleague, Dr. Trudy Mallinson. I come from an era where OTs were required to take sewing and weaving as part of our OT training. Trudy also comes from this OT tradition, but her sewing and weaving talent predated her entry into OT. She grew up in New Zealand, spinning fibers, yarns, threads, sewing her own clothes, quilting, and knitting. She comes from a family of creators, of sewers, weavers, and milliners, or hat makers. Trudy is a sewer, but I think the term sewist is more appropriate. A sewist is a sewer and an artist. And in art, the process is just as meaningful as the outcome. In sewing, Trudy uses exacting tools and instruments for her craft. There's a measuring and exacting of thread and needle, of fabric, of patterns. She aligns these items to create something cohesive, something whole, something functional, and something with beauty. But as an artist, Trudy allows the process to emerge, to guide, to discover, to embrace, while being comfortable with not always knowing the outcome. It is the process of how she uses these tools, how she attends to the sound of the sewing machine, noticing the color of the thread, the texture of the fabric, how time passes, and how it makes her feel creating something for herself or for others. These outcomes emerge in the process and aren't always exacting and predictable, and this process represents how Trudy engages in the world and in her research. Trudy brought her talent in artistry to occupational therapy when she received her diploma in OT at the Central Institute of Technology in New Zealand. She obtained her Bachelor of Science in Educational Psychology from University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, where she focused on zoology and recognized the systems or the ecological relationships surrounding the study of animals. She thought she would study cognitive neuropsychology, but she felt a different calling. She examined what were the questions she was asking herself about OT, and she was frustrated with the entrenched systems that were slow to change. Her uncle, a university professor, recognizing her critical analysis of systems, encouraged her to consider becoming a professor, which means she had to obtain a graduate degree. And when she decided on a master's degree, she had one school in mind that resonated with how she analyzes and her practice and how she sees the world. Others encouraged her to consider applying at different schools, but Trudy had already made up her mind. With grit and determination, she left New Zealand and journeyed to Chicago. Trudy was determined to learn from one of the best minds in OT, Dr. Gary Kielhofner. She was resolute in attending the University of Illinois at Chicago to work with Dr. Kielhofner. At UIC, Trudy obtained her Master of Science in Occupational Therapy and a PhD in Public Health. UIC sparked a flame within Trudy to pursue a research career resulting in over 100 publications, as well as over $7 million in funding to examine performance outcomes, not merely as an endpoint, but the assessment process as a relationship within dynamic and evolving systems at the personal, social, and institutional level. Dr. Susan Magacy, the head of occupational therapy at UIC, shared with me that under the mentorship of Dr. Gary Kielhofner, Trudy translated her passion for occupation-based theory, particularly the model of human occupation and measurement science, especially rationalysis, into a distinguished career as a health services researcher. During her postdoctoral fellowship and subsequent role as a research scientist at Northwestern University and the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, she continued to refine this expertise before moving on to faculty leadership roles at University of Southern California and George Washington University. Trudy has contributed significantly to the efforts that have impacted how the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services uses data. She has created remarkable resources for the clinical community, including the founding vision and critical contributions to the Shirley Ryan Ability Labs Rehab Measures database. So whether you know it or not, she has impacted your practice without you knowing it. Many scholars and practitioners have benefited from the far-reaching impact of her trailblazing work. Dr. Magacy shared her favorite memory of Trudy just a week after Susan started at UIC for her master's degree. Susan recalls, "I ran into Trudy and Kirsty Forsyth on the L." That's an elevated train for all you non-trained people. And they started chatting. They had been working with Gary for years and were wrapping up their PhDs, and they started quizzing Susan on her theoretical underpinnings. Her imposter syndrome flared full force. Susan started questioning what she was doing, going from semi-competent OT practitioner to this new world of graduate school. And to this day, Susan has not come away with the conversation without feeling simultaneously challenged and inspired. Trudy's passion for the profession her deep commitment to collaboration and mentorship, and her consistent willingness to hold the door open for others within our profession and the interdisciplinary community are truly exceptional. Susan concludes, I'm honored to have followed in her footsteps, and in many full circle moments, we at UIC and across the profession continue to benefit from and build upon her enduring legacy. So Dr. Magacy reflects that Trudy challenges and inspires us. Dr. Mallinson has been recognized multiple times for advancing science, for her mentoring and cultivating the next generation of scientists. Dr. Jennifer Weaver, an assistant professor at Colorado State University, says this: Trudy has been an exceptional research mentor who fostered my independence, leadership, and career by actively engaging me in real-world research activities. One of my greatest career joys is contributing to team science research projects and fostering a passion for research in my mentees. Trudy's mentorship was deeply caring and intentional, supporting not only my development as a researcher, but also my growth as a mentor. Dr. Don B. Lee, an associate professor at University of Washington, says this about Trudy. Trudy was an exceptional mentor throughout my PhD dissertation on measurement development, offering thoughtful guidance, hands-on support, and remarkable patience at every stage. Her insightful feedback continually pushed me to think more critically, strengthening both my work and my growth as a researcher. She exemplified the highest standards of rigorous scholarship and mentorship, and I am deeply grateful for her impact. Susan, Jen, and Donby are just 3 of the many researchers and practitioners who have been impacted by Trudy's mentoring. And I know many of you are here today in the audience. Trudy's mentoring and collaborations have been recognized by the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine's Early Career Group Mentor Award, the GW Office of the Vice Provost Research Mentor Award, the ACRM Edward Lohman Award for her energetic promotion of interdisciplinary team science, and last year she was inducted into the American Occupational Therapy Foundation's Academy of Research. These are just a few of the hundreds of accomplishments, publications, grants, awards, and impacts Trudy has made on science and practice. Dr. Mallinson's current work with Dr. Christina Papadimitriou of Oakland University examines shared decision-making with disorders of consciousness. This work challenges us to not just identify what we do, but to reflect and understand the how, the process, the relationship dynamics of practitioners, client, and care partners, how we share space, how we share time, how we share engagement with each other during the shared decision-making process. Having the confidence to enter a space, to not know, to doubt, to move, to shift, to tinker. These are the qualities that allow for discovery. Always knowing with prediction can bind you to predetermined outcomes. In today's Slagle lecture, Dr. Mallinson challenges and inspires us to have the courage to not know, to explore, to discover, to tinker. Dr. Papadimitriou shares this thought. Trudy and I share a deep fascination with NASA's Mars rover missions, and early in our work together, we found ourselves drawn to it as a metaphor for the science we do. It's iterative, humble, curious, and built on the conviction that discovery requires venturing into the unknown, learning from missteps, and trusting and learning from the whole team. At GW, the Vice President of Research, Dr. Robert Miller, says Trudy's expertise and enthusiasm is infectious. Trudy is a leader in the development of cutting-edge translational research at GW and beyond, as you have heard and can see with her various roles at GW. She is a professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership and the Department of Health, Human Function, and Rehabilitation Sciences, where the occupational therapy program is. She is the program director in the HRSA Postdoctoral Fellowship in Primary Care and the co-program director of the PhD in Translational Health Sciences program. She's also the Associate Dean for Research in Health Sciences within the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at GW. Trudy is an innovative, enthusiastic, infectious, and impactful leader. At George Washington University, we call ourselves revolutionaries. Dr. Mallinson is revolutionary. She's calling us to revolutionize occupational therapy to meet the challenges of today and the future. At GW, we also say, raise high. We raise high to advance knowledge. We raise high to serve society. We raise high to change the world. This year's Eleanor Clarke Slagle lecture is titled Beyond the Score, Reclaiming the Meaning of Assessment in Relationship-Centered Care. Dr. Mallinson challenges and inspires us to stand up, to take risks, to step into the unknown, to discover, to make history, to raise high. Please raise high for Dr. Trudy Mallinson.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. I am truly grateful. Thank you so much, Roger, for that warm introduction. And I want to thank AOTA for hosting yet another outstanding conference. Thank you, AOTA. And for this opportunity to share some perspectives with you. Before I begin, I want to recognize all those who have supported my journey here. First, my deepest gratitude to all the generous, creative souls with whom I have the joy to collaborate. Your curiosity, openness, willingness to sit with and explore uncharted territories and to sit with the unresolved make every step of our journey a delight. Thank you to Roger Idaishi and the faculty and students of the George Washington University for all your support and encouragement. Yeah, raise high! To the many research assistants, students, and mentees from whom, but much more importantly, with whom and from whom I have been fortunate to learn. Thank you for being on this journey. Lastly, to the practitioners, patients, and care partners who trust us with their stories. You are the inspiration. Thank you. Ngā mihi nui. I trained as an occupational therapist, as Roger mentioned, in the early 1980s. The more I practiced, the more I came to see how little we focused on what seemed to matter to patients and families, their values, interests, rebuilding a sense of efficacy in the face of physical and mental capacities that challenge their quest to live their best lives. A colleague and I avidly read the work of Dr. Gary Kielhofner and colleagues like Dr. Janice Burke and Cynthia Hurd, and of course, Dr. Mary Riley. A shout out to Annette Dunham in New Zealand for those early, long ago conversations. So I crossed the ocean to study at UIC, where I was fortunate to study with Dr. Gary Kielhofner for almost 10 years, culminating in him serving as my dissertation chair. At the time I moved to UIC, it was alive with faculty working on both measurement and narrative. Dr. Ann Fisher was working on the assessment of motor and process skills. Dr. Anita Bundy was working on the test of playfulness. Dr. Craig Veloso was working on building a range of health outcome measurements, all applying the Roche measurement model. Dr. Mary Lawler was studying social construction and family-centered care, and Dr. Cheryl Mattingly was in the middle of her critical work on the narrative nature of clinical reasoning. It was truly a magical time and place to be an emerging scholar in occupational therapy. I learned more than you can imagine from each of these incredible occupational therapy scholars, and I owe each of them an enormous debt of gratitude. But there will always be a special sense of gratitude for Gary, who was an extraordinary mentor, who taught me to believe in myself, point me to a career as an occupational therapy researcher, and to imagine how our profession's research can have far-reaching impact in this world. He also left me with some special advice as I prepared for this lecture today. Although many of us wanted to nominate him, Gary never got to give the Slagle lecture. He always felt like he had not done his best work yet. Even though he left us with studies, assessments, intervention strategies, and books that changed how we practice, his work has influenced those who worked with him and those who came after him. And then with his untimely passing, we will never know what it was he was yet to achieve. But that's the thing about science, is that we are never done. We are never currently doing our best work. When I was finishing my dissertation, Dr. Ben Wright gave me this advice. He said, "Trudy, this will be the worst piece of science you ever do." And he was right. Those are very wise words. I know the scientists hear all of it. The science we do next will always be better than the science that came before it. This is the very essence of what it means to be a scientist. We are always striving to understand more than we do today. So in his own enigmatic way, Gary reached across time and space to encourage me to share with you all the best I have today, to provide a glimpse of where I think our science might head in the future, knowing that these thoughts are imperfect and will be better the next time I tell them. But that is the nature of science. Some brief disclosures and acknowledgements. This is a presentation in 3 parts. In this first act, I want to talk about using the assessments we have to drive progress. This will mean that we demand more of the assessments we have, and we will need to use contemporary measurement science to advance our efforts. If you're trying to measure differences between people and over time, then you need assessments to act like rulers. Let me tell you why measurement is important for driving innovation in your practice. In Bill Gates' 2013 end-of-year newsletter, he wrote, "Over the holidays, I read The Most Powerful Idea in the World, a brilliant chronicle by William Rosen, one of the many innovations it took to harness steam power. Among the most important was a new way to measure energy output of engines and a micrometer dubbed the Lord Chancellor that was able to gauge tiny distances. Such measuring tools," Rosen writes, "allowed inventors to see their incremental design changes and how that led to improvements like quality parts, better performance, less coal consumption needed to build better engines. Innovations in steam power demonstrate a larger lesson. Without feedback from precise measurement," Rosen writes, "invention is doomed to be rare and erratic. With it, invention becomes commonplace." Bill Gates continues, "I have been struck again and again by how important measurement is to improving the human condition. You can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal, find a measure that will drive progress toward that goal in a feedback loop similar to the one Rosen describes. This may seem pretty basic, but it is amazing to me how often it is not done and how hard it is to get right." So I'm posing a question. Do our rehabilitation measures drive a feedback loop in which small innovations in rehabilitation interventions result in demonstrable change in patient outcomes? Let me show you some advances in measurement that can drive improvements in occupational therapy practice. Before I do that, a comment about the examples. Most of today's examples come from my collaborations in the area of neurorehabilitation. And while there are certainly things about doing outcome assessment with folks who are in disordered states of consciousness that are particularly interesting from a measurement perspective, these are certainly not unique issues. You will likely recognize the same concerns in your own areas of practice. By the end of the presentation, I'll try and lay out how I see this applying to occupational therapy and rehabilitation broadly. Key to measuring outcomes is the idea of change over time. It tries to answer the question, has what we have been doing clinically made a difference? The first step here would seem to be pretty obvious. We need to plot our data over time. But before we do that, I want to talk briefly about raw scores. On the right of this graph, you can see the items of the coma near coma scale arranged in order from easiest at the bottom to most challenging at the top. Along the bottom is a ruler from -4 on the left to 6 on the right, with the left side representing less neurobehavioral function and the right representing more neurobehavioral function. The raw scores have been transformed using Roche measurement to demonstrate the amount of neurobehavioral function represented by a 1 raw score point change for each step of each item. Notice that the length of the line between 1 and 2 for the bell ringing item is much longer than the line from 1 to 2 for the verbal command item. This means that a person who makes a 1 point change, a 1 point raw score change on bell ringing has made more change in neurobehavioral function than a person who makes a 1 point change on verbal command. This is because rating scales are not equal interval. A 1 raw point change doesn't mean the same thing for every step on every item. This isn't some peculiarity of the coma-near-coma scale. This is true of all rating scale raw scores. So why is it a problem if we use raw scores? These two graphs show the recovery of a group of patients who are in disordered states of consciousness. Just looking at the graph on the left is the coma-near-coma scale raw scores, and on the right, the scores have been transformed into Roche measures. Sorry, can we say thanks? Just by looking at these two graphs, we would make different conclusions about recovery over time. The raw scores would mislead us into thinking that recovery is steeper. That means it looks better than it actually is. So going forward, let's focus on equal interval measures. Okay, so this alarmingly complicated table comes from the same study that you just saw by Dr. Tricia Grady-Dominguez and Dr. Jen Weaver and colleagues. Don't worry about all the details in the boxes. This is called a nomogram, which is just a fancy word for a helpful lookup chart that helps us decide if change on the coma-near-coma scale is beyond measurement error. Measurement error exists for all rating scale assessments. We do our best to minimize it, but it still exists. The left side is a patient measure at the time 1. The top line is patient measure at time 2. You find the intersection where the person's scores meet at time 1 and time 2. If they meet in the gray area, the patient didn't change, at least not more than measurement error. If they meet in the green area, change is greater than measurement error. You get the idea. So to bring this idea home, the graph on the left is the same graph that we saw a few slides ago. The graph on the right shows the measurement error for the baseline measure. That's the yellow star, so that's at time 1. And the green line above it is measurement error. None of the measures in week 2, 3, or 4 are above the green line. So patients didn't really change more than measurement error in that period. The red star at week 5 is the first time that patient measures exceeded the CMDC, the measurement error. The green line at the top of that is now the new measurement error from the red star. And you can see that none of the measures in week 6, 7, or 8 exceed this line. That's because error on short tests like the CNC are largest at the extremes. So the measures can't change more than measurement error. We need to understand that this is a problem with really short measures like the CNC, and we need to demand more of our assessments. Looking at a trend line of patient measures without accounting for measurement error can be misleading. If we, and by that I really mean all of us, don't demand that our assessments show us measurement error, we will continue to misinterpret assessment findings. Future research should address how accounting for measurement error might be integrated into clinical practice to support person-centered practice and clinical decision-making. Turning to another issue. A fair number of occupational therapy assessments, the practitioner observes the patient and assigns a score. These are called clinician-reported outcomes, or ClinROs. On the graph on the left, from a Department of Defense funded study, It shows data collected by 49 practitioners on 690 separate sessions using an observational assessment called the Disorders of Consciousness Scale 25, which measures neurobehavioral function for persons in DOC. Applying the Roche measurement model, we adjusted the practitioners for how severely or how leniently they rated their patients. The gray band through the middle, actually, it might look a little blue, but the band through the middle shows practitioners whose measures are within measurement error. Essentially, they rated like the average practitioner. Most practitioners were within this range. But 35%, that's 241 out of 690 of these measures exceeded measurement error. 183 times patient function was underestimated. 58 times it was overestimated. So what does this mean for clinical practice? The figure on the right shows one patient from this study, rated by 3 different practitioners each week. The red line is the unadjusted measures. The blue line accounts for rater severity leniency. We would come to very different conclusions about this patient's response to treatment if we only considered the red line. So in other words, what looks like patient improvement at week 3 is really a result of a lenient rater. Future research should address how accounting for rater severity leniency might be integrated into clinical practice to support person-centered practice and clinical decision-making. In another federally funded study, led by Dr. Alison Kogan, we examined the impact of occupational therapy minutes per day on self-care gain per day in a group of 100 adults receiving rehabilitation post-stroke in either an inpatient rehabilitation or a skilled nursing facility. Our team co-calibrated cognition items from the FIM, MDS, and OASIS to measure patient level of cognitive impairment. This study had purposely collected all these items from those scales on all patients, regardless of setting. We also transformed self-care function scores at admission and discharge to equal intervals. This study provided preliminary evidence that functional status at admission and occupational therapy service intensity predicted self-care gain rate more strongly than a patient's level of cognitive impairment. This suggests that cognitive impairment may not be a good rationale to limit access to intensive rehabilitation services or the amount of therapy offered to people post-stroke. This important finding supporting the benefit of occupational therapy practice was identified using accurate and precise assessment measures. Dr. Jennifer Weaver led a study funded by the American Occupational Therapy Foundation grant to apply the American Institute of Research principles of person-centered measurement in adapting the recovery ruler to fit clinical workflows. The recovery ruler transforms the raw scores of the Coma Recovery Scale Revised, it's another measure of neurobehavioral function, and aligns these measures to different stages of disorders of consciousness. She collaborated with practitioners, care partners, researchers, and design specialists to create a tool that could communicate real-time results to care partners. As a result of this collaboration, changes to the recovery ruler better aligned with person-centered measurement principles. For example, emphasizing the 0 to 100 scale and bolding tick marks are consistent with principles of comprehensibility and transparency. By co-creating the form with practitioners, the revisions to the context-specific section at the bottom of the form aligned with site-specific workflows and documentation practices. The study also highlighted differences between care partners who wanted item measures in real time and practitioners who felt this might be too much information for care partners. Adding the family education page provided a holistic context for care partners and consistency in language for practitioners. This study is innovative because it describes a process for tailoring knowledge translation tools that enhances person-centered measurement. The data supported an award from the Department of Defense to implement and validate the recovery ruler nationally, and now includes a data set of more than 1,000 persons in disorders of consciousness, their care partners, and practitioners. I hope these studies spark your interest in new ways that we can think creatively about applying contemporary measurement approaches to existing assessments to drive innovations in clinical practice and to improve patient care. Now I want to turn to building better measures. In this second act, I want to talk to you about designing and building better assessments. You have probably already gathered that I am a self-proclaimed measurement nerd. Raised sewing my own clothes, knitting, quilting, and now a passionate spinner of yarn, I grew up appreciating the value of accurate and precise measurement. All of us rely on accurate and precise measurement every day, whether we're putting fruit on a scale at the checkout or whether we're measuring our height and weight at a doctor's office. Doing these simple tasks requires a raft of covert assumptions about weights and scales and rulers. As an occupational therapist, I learned early that the tools we use to evaluate patient progress rarely meet the threshold of being considered measures, even though we aspire to use them that way. Pain scales, self-care assessments, and quality of life surveys produce numeric values that we treat as if they acted like rulers, yet the data they produce are at best ordered and not equal interval, which is a requirement for precise and accurate measurement. Occupational therapy has been at the forefront of measurement innovation for decades. Probably one of the most iconic images, at least for those of us of a certain age, is the cover of the Southern California sensory integration tests. Early occupational therapy pioneers in the 1960s brought rigor and scientific method to the development and testing of assessments. And in the early 2000s, contemporary psychometrics such as the Roche model to healthcare assessments. As occupational therapists, we continue to innovate. For example, Doctors Malo, Smith-Rowley, Parham, and Schaff have led an international partnership that reimagined assessment for diagnosing sensory integration disorders. Doctors Edwards and Giles have led a national effort to respond to the challenge of measuring functional cognition as a uniquely occupational therapy concern. Dr. Susan Magacy has examined issues of accommodations and standardization that reduce the access to assessments for the very individuals we aim to support. There are many more examples, but I also want to challenge us to lead from the front in the decade ahead. I want to challenge us to use the best assessment technology, the most inclusive and collaborative approaches, to challenge deeply held assumptions about who participates, who collaborates, and how in the design, development, and interpretation of outcome measures. First, let me say a little bit about what it means to measure. Those of you who have seen me present at all in the past will recognize this slide, but there's a reason it's an oldie but a goodie. When we ask survey items or present test items for a response, we can think of these as being analogous to presenting a weight. If we give someone the same item of the same weight each time, do we really expect their performance or their response to be different the next time? No. In reality, we build assessments, we assume we are asking questions or presenting items that are different in weights or challenge. Some items will be easier for persons to respond to, some will be harder. Some items will be easier for almost everyone, some items will be harder for most people. This is essentially how assessments distinguish among people. So for example, we have a concept we are trying to measure, such as fatigue or function in everyday activities. We identify items that represent everyday activities, and some of them are easier, and some of them are harder, more or less fatiguing in this case. And we think about the people we will observe doing those tasks or responding to those questions. Some of them will have less functional ability, some of them will have more. The people with more ability will be able to do more of the items more easily. But what if a rating scale of fatigue or functional status, or whatever it is that we're measuring, gives a higher score for doing activities independently without a device than completing activities independently with a device? There are inherent within these different scores assumptions about what real independence looks like and who gets to be considered independent or more or less fatigued or whatever we're measuring. To some degree, we all rely on others in our lives and on devices to complete everyday activities. Who gets to decide which devices are legitimate parts of everyday life and which ones should get you a lower score on an assessment? What are the implications for such choices? Almost every assessment that involves items and rating scales has embedded such assumptions. So I start from a position of considering measuring, by which I mean designing, developing, using, and interpreting, as actions. Actions that we can thoughtfully and mindfully choose and change in order to reflect more just, inclusive, diverse perspectives, and that can serve to build more just and equitable occupational therapy rehabilitation services. Mark Wilson is a psychometrician working in education who describes outcomes, who describes the development of measure design and development as involving 4 sequential steps. But I have argued in a recent book chapter that I think it's more useful to think of them as spaces. The actions we take within and between these spaces to design and develop assessments involve constructions. The constructivist nature of all rehabilitation measurement is important to remember in a time when much is written about the value of team science, the inclusion of diverse community partner perspectives throughout the design and implementation of research studies, and about reporting out our research in ways that our community partners can use and understand. When our measures reflect fundamentally exclusive assumptions, so does our science, and it will undermine all our other attempts at inclusivity. So, in the concept space or the construct space, we describe the thing that we are trying to measure. Cultural, linguistic, and phenomenological assumptions of the researchers will dominate these constructs unless we make a conscious effort to critique those ideas and to actively seek out alternative experiences. Including community partners and other interested parties throughout the assessment design and development process, especially during construct development, incorporates important perspectives that inform our actions, our choices in item, outcome, and measurement spaces. So, moving from the construct to the construct or concept of interest, to writing items and rating scale steps that will be used as the basis for evaluating persons, researchers must make multiple and frequently arbitrary decisions about what matters, such as content, wording, format, clarity, respondent burden, clinical workflows. We almost always have multiple options in choosing not just the item content, but the words we use for the items. In the item space, text is developed that represents the construct in the real world. But the question is, and that we need to ask ourselves, is whose real world? Even among those who speak English, and that is still the predominant language in which most rehabilitation assessments are developed, the words chosen and the assumptions expressed within the text of the items can be understood and misunderstood very differently. And for translations to other languages, there is much more to be concerned about than just the accurate translation from one language to another. For example, are the ideas expressed by the items representative of a broad and diverse range of experiences? Whose perspectives are included? Whose perspectives have been excluded? In the outcome space, researchers choose to categorize the dimension of interest to reflect more or less of the constructed trait. Think frequency or amount of satisfaction or a degree of ability. Who gets to determine not only what counts as more or less, but also what is valued more or less, is seldom, if ever, critically evaluated in rehabilitation research. In the measurement space, researchers evaluate how well data, or the responses that we've collected, with the items and rating scale steps conform to a statistical model. In the Roche measurement model, the ordering of the items from easiest to hardest is the operational definition of the construct. And yet when researchers report reliability and validity results, attention is hardly ever paid to the ordering of the people. If we have a conceptual map that does not anticipate that persons from marginalized groups would be more likely to score at the lower end of a scale, then if we achieve such a result, we should ask first where the failure in instrument design occurred. We should not assume that some objective or fundamental truth about differences in human performance has been revealed. This is important. Thank you. Thank you. This is important because the statistical tools that we rely on establish reliability and validity of assessments that grew from historical roots that promoted exclusion and inferiority of marginalized groups. Statistical methods such as correlation coefficients, principal component analysis, factor analysis, and cluster analysis all have their roots in comparing humans as same or different in hierarchically ordered ways, and in doing so, claim what is preferred. This is also true of the logistic curve and, by extension, the Roche measurement model, which makes assumptions about human differences are categorized and what ordering of those differences is preferred. Critically, how numbers are assigned to reflect more or preferred reflects underlying social structure and not natural truths. Thank you. Researchers must engage in ongoing and reflexive dialogue with the data, and more importantly, with community partners of marginalized groups, to determine when observed differences are the result of limitations in constructs and/or poorly constructed items and rating scales, which by design included perspectives that were not theirs. Thank you. So, Act 3, designing and building a relationship-centered care measure. Those of you who know me well know that I love all things Mars rover. Why? Well, to begin with, there are so many cool measurement tools packed onto rover. But the fact that we can explore another planet so far away, I think is absolutely remarkable. But what I find most engaging about rover is that it is a constant source of inspiration around overcoming unexpected problems. Dust that blocks instruments, tires that wear out too quickly, getting out of a crater that you didn't expect to roll into. But time and again, overcoming those unexpected challenges has led to unexpected insights and discoveries. Since the early 2000s, our group has been working on how to develop better outcome measures for folks in disordered states of consciousness who are recovering from severe brain injury. One of the challenges is that we didn't, and perhaps still don't, know what constitutes a meaningful change on any disorders of consciousness outcome measure. How much change really is important. As part of this work, we were collaborating with colleagues in Chicago who included several partners with adult children who were at the time living in disorders of consciousness. They told us, "No one listens to me." They felt that practitioners did not value their observations and of their loved ones and their in-depth knowledge of who this person was during neurobehavioral assessments. Around 2019, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, through the American Institutes of Research, funded us to study person-centered outcomes research. We attempted to create real-world vignettes of observable change in persons in DOC that we could then associate with different amounts of change on a DOC outcome measure. Although we knew from our care partners that indeed nobody listens to them, we didn't realize how deep their need was to actually tell their story without being interrupted, without judgment, and with an attitude of compassion and understanding. The unanticipated emotional work of telling and listening to caregivers' lives prompted us to hold an unplanned town hall with care partners and practitioners. What we learned was that care partners want us to listen to their perspectives with caring and curiosity, and practitioners need more support and tools to foster shared decision-making. This work resulted in several unexpected but fundamentally perspective-changing findings that shifted our focus to relationship-centered measurement. Care partners connected their loved ones' responses prior to the brain injury. They see their person. When asked how they knew that a loved one was making progress, they would say things like, because she sighed the way she always did. Practitioners, by contrast, challenged by much of the ambiguity in their practice, are looking for signs of intentionality, of motivation, of awareness. Through this work, we came to see the limitations of language, such as person-centered measurement, when patients almost always show up in relationship, and because treatment decisions have consequences, not just for patients, but for care partners as well. We came to appreciate the central role of relationships in clinical encounters. Relationships between patient and care partner, between patient and care partner and practitioners. We also learned that clinical environments where there is a great deal of ambiguity, we see ridiculously creative, inventive problem solving. You all are crazy good at problem solving. So as this AIR project was wrapping up, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality called for the development of a process-focused assessment of shared decision-making. We were bubbling with ideas of things to say about relationship-centered process. And we knew, well, we thought we knew, how to build assessments. In 2023, we were fortunate enough to be awarded an AHRQ grant to build such an assessment. Let me just say that the analogy of Mars rover and getting out of craters that you didn't expect to find yourself in will be relevant to what comes next. So let me show you an everyday happening in occupational therapy practice. Adele and Jackie, two occupational therapy practitioners, have transferred Carla from her hospital bed to the wheelchair, while her husband Wayne stands nearby. Carla is a professional woman in her early 40s who has 2 young children with Wayne. Carla sustained a severe brain injury and is now in a disordered state of consciousness. In this session, the OTs are trying something new. They are hoping that having Carla try to activate a motorized wheelchair will help with her arousal. As they are trying out the activity, a problem arises. Carla's right arm has some spasticity, making it hard for her to reach the joystick. What to do now? At this point, the practitioner's focus switches from encouraging Carla to move the chair forward on her own to searching for a solution that would make it possible for the test drive activity to proceed. What will they do? How are they going to solve this problem? How occupational therapists and other rehab practitioners make everyday decisions that accomplish the work of therapy does not always involve the straightforward application of devices and exercises. Instead, what we see is intricate collaboration involving highly complex, nuanced behavioral and emotional interactions among practitioners, patients, and care partners. Our team refers to this process as relationship-centered micro-decision making. We start from the position that persons who require high levels of support and cannot independently communicate their needs remain a vital part of the decision-making process, because it's their values, interests, and responses and reactions to treatment that care partners and practitioners appraise and accommodate when making decisions. We refer to the act of collaborating on these small, everyday, in-the-moment decisions as micro-decision-making. We're certainly not the first to use this term. Carlson and colleagues described micro-decisions following observations of interactions with patients on mechanical ventilation in intensive care units, and our work has certainly been informed by their findings about micro-decisions. So remember, our goal here is to build a process assessment of relationship-centered care. If we are going to unpack what is happening in this situation with Carla, Wayne, and the OT practitioners, and understand how it proceeds to some kind of closure, we need to clearly define what we are looking at, that is our constructs, and in this case, relationship-centered decision-making and micro-decisions. To do this work of conceptually describing relationship-centered micro-decision-making, we began with data collection that was informed by our prior work, current literature, and our varied interdisciplinary backgrounds as scholars, researchers, practitioners, and care partners. We collected data primarily at 2 major US inpatient rehabilitation hospitals that provided specialized care for adults in DOC. We videotaped 59 sessions with 10 patients, 14 care partners, and 54 practitioners in over 34 hours of therapy sessions. We transcribed the sessions using conversational analysis and conventions, and we conducted 26 elicitation interviews where we showed practitioners and care partners small clips from the sessions to gather their perceptions of what they thought was taking place. We uploaded all the therapy sessions into Eleanor, which is an annotation tool for audio and video recordings, and it's what you see represented on the screen here. We documented and described both spoken and embodied actions in an attempt to identify not only what micro-decisions look like, but also how it's accomplished in real time by participants. We have identified almost 80 micro-decisions, but I want to show you one that we identified early on and that has become one that we return to often because it's a clear exemplar. A brief comment about photos and transcripts. All of the participants have given their permission for their images to be used for teaching and educating, as well as for research. Still, we find it most reasonable to blur the images and to change their names to pseudonyms. We have shared this work at other conferences, and we know that in the relatively small world that is rehabilitation, some of you will recognize these participants. We transcribed all of the micro-decisions using conversational analysis conventions, which is important for a deeply nuanced reading and to explicate highly complex interactional processes. Working in this way allowed us to detail what these micro-decisions look like, how they are organized by the participants, and how the participants' actions work to carry them forward. From the outset, our focus was not on what participants are doing, but how they are doing it. An important CA conversational analysis insight is that utterances serve multiple purposes. Importantly, utterances simultaneously respond to prior utterances while setting the stage for future ones. What we are looking at is how participants engage in this continuous unfolding. So, returning to our therapy session, let's look at what happens as Adele, Jackie, Wayne, and Carla try to solve the problem with reaching the joystick that has interrupted the goal of moving the chair. First, Adele and Jackie take up the problem when Jackie suggests that they might think about casting. They discuss what type of splint, the pros and cons, and how far the splint should extend. Yep, we can. Meanwhile, Wayne continues to encourage Carla to move the chair forward. Come on, come on. Adele and Jackie then recruit Wayne to join the problem solving. Wayne does not ask for elaborations at this point, but he acknowledges and affirms the concern and the proposals. And Jackie expands on their goal to take a prolonged stretch. Adele explains further her rationale about how far the splint would extend and the angle Carla's elbow would be in, which Wayne endorses. Adele adds to her prior thoughts, considering extending the splint down to Carla's fingers and the implications of this, which she softens with some humor. I wouldn't want to get too wild and torture her. Adele then brings Carla into the conversation. Right, Carla? That's not my ideal in life. Wayne picks up on this, joking, it's your kids, I guess. Jackie joins the joke, even though it might feel like it. But there is more here that Adele needs to explain about the splinting option, related to how long the splint would be in place, admitting that we're going to need to wait and see what Carla tells us, and suggesting that the outcome can't be known without trying. Jackie expands that it might need to be on for a couple of days. And then we hear where Adele's additional concerns lie, which is in the change of clothing Carla will need to make, wearing a gown rather than her usual street clothes. Wayne acknowledges that he's okay with that trade-off, but Adele continues to reassure Wayne that ensuring Carla's modesty is their concern. Wayne confirms with explanation why he's okay with this plan, because he has noticed Carla being able to do less and less, and that she's gotten tighter and tighter in that arm since she recently got sick. And the group eventually agrees to try the splint the following week. So we believe that there is a lot going on in this brief episode. We see something that we have come to recognize occurs frequently in occupational therapy sessions, and that's the emergence of a practical problem that hinders or halts the ongoing therapeutic activity. Adele and Jackie recognize that Carla's spasticity in her right arm is impeding her ability to operate the joystick. Progressivity is halted. So to summarize, the main action of the session, having Carla move the chair, is interrupted. First, Adele and Jackie take up the emerging practical problem when they recognize that Carla is having trouble reaching the joystick. They open the decision-making process by considering the pros and cons of a splint and what type. Then they recruit Wayne to help negotiate and consider splinting options, including how far the splint will extend, the wear schedule, and how this will be determined. Progressivity is restored to the session when they all agree to try the splint in the future. Incidentally, we identified a separate micro-decision interwoven with this one about the shape of and model of a potential new joystick. We're actually finding that this is common for practitioners to be addressing multiple micro-decisions in a single session, and for some of that decision-making to be interwoven. Micro-decisions in response to emerging practical problems are common, but they're certainly not the only type of micro-decision-making that we're finding. But we had to start somewhere to get our hands around this complexity. So for now, we're focusing on micro-decisions that arise in response to an emerging practical problem. We're also finding 4 features that are pervasive and consistent across micro-decisions. First, they're highly improvisational. They arise from the need to solve unanticipated and in-the-moment problems that halts the ongoing progress of the encounter. Next, they're jointly negotiated. We prefer this term to shared because our own observations and the large amount of literature on shared decision-making doesn't actually make clear what it is that makes decision-making, in fact, shared. Next, these decisions involve a high degree of uncertainty and ambiguity. What is the best, right, most reasonable solution is not immediately clear, and the outcome is often ambiguous. It is not known without actually trying the solution in real time. This contrasts to current views of shared decision-making, which often focus on choices and options and likely outcomes that have evidence or are at least known. Lastly, and this is something we see in rehabilitation and occupational therapy encounters, is the high level of relational intimacy, by which we mean not just the close physical contact, but the socially consequential nature of the interactions. We've certainly learned a lot about how to do this kind of research, but in the spirit of Mars rover, this is the result of tackling unanticipated complex challenges with far-reaching implications. Lastly, in addition to the process and features of microdecisions that I have much too briefly shared, we argue that microdecisions are embedded in a deeper intersubjective space of relational dimensions and social forces. Think of these as the terrain in which relationship-centered microdecision making occurs. We present these as separate but integrated dimensions, much like a GIS topographical map, pulled apart for visibility but not hierarchically arranged. The demands and influences exerted during decision making are often hidden from our awareness, but they influence how we do things and how we understand them. Adele and Jackie have treated Carla together, and they lean on each other's knowledge. Wayne serves both as Carla's care partner and advocate. From our elicitation interviews, we learned that the pressures of the US rehabilitation system to show progress in tangible functional skills weigh on each of these participants. Adele and Jackie feel pressure to document a certain kind of progress. Wayne, too, is aware that Carla's progress is needed to extend her stay. We argue it's important to make explicit how these unseen dimensions are at play in microdecision making. And so you can see, it turns out that we have spent a lot of time in the construct space, clearly, deeply understanding how process of microdecision making unfolds has required much more attention than we anticipated. But what a remarkable journey we find ourselves on. And that's okay. So while we may have spent a lot of time in the conceptual crater, we have learned some important things to take forward. Microdecision making can be seen if we look for it, and it's foundational to how rehabilitation and occupational therapy get done. It's easier to see what practitioners are doing, and we don't have a robust language for talking about how they jointly negotiate decisions, but we're making progress by instead describing how this creative and innovative aspect of rehabilitation gets done. Adele reflected that every day with Carla is an adventure. Her stance of being open to what Carla brings each day creates a critical environment in which this kind of improvisational, collaborative work that we see in this brief encounter. But this kind of complex, nuanced decision-making is fundamentally challenging how we have traditionally thought about the assessment of shared decision-making. And as I start to wrap up this presentation today, I want to tell you a little bit about what I mean by that and why I think this work matters. Okay, chess-playing robots. I know, but just go with me on here with this. Chess-playing robots have been a favorite among computer programmers who try to build machines that process information faster and more optimally than humans. While chess appears on the surface to be highly complex, it is not so complex to program. And this is because chess assumes players are always rational. And no matter what position the pieces are arranged in on the board, there is a finite number of options for advancing the game. Creativity, the kind of collaborative improvisation that we see in clinical practice, in your clinical practice, is much more challenging to program. Anil Sith, a neuroscientist, reflects that humans have an ecological smartness that arises from each of us being in our own particular bodies, in our own particular experiences, in our own particular environments. Further, we make mistakes and we learn from those mistakes. And we make mistakes with others, and together we share that embodied knowledge. Creativity, then, isn't in the hardware of our neurons, but is an emergent property that arises from our bodies as they interact in physical environments and social encounters. In an early paper about participation, Joy Hamilton and I described the ethereal nature of this of performance as it occurs at the intersection of person, task, and environment. It turns out these ordinary decisions that practitioners, patients, and care partners make every day are much more complicated than playing chess. Trying to understand shared decision-making in clinical encounters for most assessments to date has fallen into the same trap of exchanging very complex processes for chess-playing algorithms. These assessments capture what practitioners do, as if there are algorithms that practitioners must simply learn and then operationalize, such as explain the need to deliberate, explore treatment options, assess patient preferences, make recommendations. You've all seen them. Carlson and colleagues have been very influential in our own work of micro-decision making. But even here, these researchers chose to exclude the ordinary things like what position the patient should be in for best function, and to focus on what they called more clearly medical decisions, and by that they meant had more clear, rational, and limited choices. But here's the thing. Focusing on what practitioners do rather than how they are accomplishing it, we render inconsequential this extraordinary work that you all do, this remarkably intricate co-laboring of practitioners, patients, and care partners. Not having a clear way to measure and talk about this extraordinary process of care ripples through every aspect of our healthcare environment. One of the things I argued earlier was that for better or worse, measuring is not a benign act. When we measure something, it focuses our attention in particular ways, and it gives us a language for talking about that thing. It is so important that we pay attention to the concepts we attempt to measure and from whose perspective and the words we use. Because in practice right now, we primarily use outcome measures. Our talk about our practice and what we document about our practice tends to focus on what we accomplished rather than how we accomplished it. Another ripple has to do with how we take care of practitioners, or rather, how we don't take care of practitioners. I have observed how little time and attention gets paid to the health and well-being of practitioners, which, given the complexity of this deeply relational, interactional work that you're involved in, is puzzling and troubling. Although there are some forward-thinking, relationship-centered organizations who try to attend to the health of practitioners, I suspect that because we don't have clear ways of describing this intensely demanding work, we also do not have clear ways of attending to the genuine needs it creates in practitioners. A further ripple concerns how we educate practitioners. There is certainly more attention to therapeutic use of self than in the past, but required program standards and historical norms place a heavy emphasis on skills, and perhaps less emphasis on relationship-centered care. And while this kind of problem solving that we saw certainly reflects a level of expertise, I think it's likely that practitioners stumble their way towards this expertise. Is the openness to adventure we observed in Adele and Jackie something students can learn alongside evidence-based practice and clinical decision-making? For example, led by Roger A. Daishi and the faculty at GW Occupational Therapy Program, they teach a curriculum based on themes of situated, purposeful, reflective learning, systems thinking that connects personal, community, and cultural realms, and justice-based approaches to empower health. Another ripple relates to the ways we attempt to apply research to practice. Knowledge translation and implementation science certainly receive a great deal of attention and funding. Yet for all that we have learned about these approaches in the past few decades, remarkably little has changed about the speed with which new evidence is taken up, or why practices are so hard to sustain. I'd suggest that this is at least in part of paying attention to what gets done rather than how it gets done. A final ripple on this pond relates to the kinds of healthcare policies we enact. While outcome measures and patient outcomes are certainly really important, focusing on outcomes at the expense of real attention to relationship-centered process creates perverse incentives in healthcare delivery that promotes neither patient satisfaction or practitioner fulfillment. Thank you for bearing with me. I began this talk by suggesting that we need to use the outcome measures we have to drive improvements where they can and to recognize their limitations. There are ways that we can design and develop better assessments. Better because they are based on clear conceptual foundations. Better because they include key partners throughout the process. Better because they are developed with clear attention to whose perspectives are and are not included. Better because they use the most current and appropriate measurement technology for their intended purpose. And better because they empower key partners to make collaborative decisions. Lastly, we need to start designing, developing, and measuring process as a relational phenomenon. I have suggested that really trying to measure process to articulate how it is that practitioners, partners, and patients and care partners co-labor can provide an important and perhaps radically different way of understanding what it means to do occupational therapy. Thank you all for listening to my journey from outcome measures to stumbling steps forward in measuring the process of relationship-centered care. In parting, I'll leave you with this question. If you had more words, more concepts, more ways to describe how you, your patients, and their care partners accomplish therapy together, what moments of doing occupational therapy would rise to the surface for you? Tanakwe.
Trudy, thank you for sharing your brilliant research with us. Thank you so
much.
I loved where you started, which was the best I have today. I love that. That is so beautiful. That's going to help us all stay focused and grounded in the moment, but also excited and hopeful and optimistic about the best that's yet to come. So thank you. One more time for Dr. Mallinson, please. On behalf of all of us at AOTA, congratulations on being our 2025 Slagle awardee. The Eleanor Clarke Slagle Lectureship is an academic honor whose purpose is to recognize a member of AOTA who has substantially and innovatively contributed to the development of the profession's body of knowledge through research, education, or clinical practice. Since its inception in 1954, 62 occupational therapy scholars have received this prestigious award and presented their lecture at the following year's annual conference. Today, we proudly recognize Dr. Shelley Lane, as the newest recipient of this award, and we can't wait for you to hear her keynote message next year. Please join us in congratulating Dr. Shelley Lane, our 2026 Eleanor Clarke Slagle awardee.
Congratulations.
I love you. Congratulations, Dr. Shelley Lane, and one more time, Dr. Trudy Mallinson. They will both be making their way to the AOTA meet and greet area where you can congratulate both of them and get photos. We want to thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.